just a quiet veteran packing SEAL parachutes, until the commander spotted the tattoo on his neck. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. It was a quiet afternoon at the military base, the hum of activity filling the air. Soldiers moved around, preparing equipment for a training exercise that would be held the following day. But among the bustle, there was one figure that stood out, a quiet veteran, known to most simply as the old man who packed parachutes. His hands, calloused and steady, moved with practiced precision as he folded each parachute with care. His movements were methodical, as if each fold had a purpose, a meaning. Yet, despite his skill, there was a sense of mystery about him. He wasn't seen much outside of his work area, and few knew much about his past. The younger soldiers, with their eager eyes and youthful arrogance, often made fun of him behind his back. They would laugh at his slow movements, his quiet demeanor. To them, he was just an old man, a relic of a time long gone. They didn't realize that his quietness wasn't weakness, but a lifetime of experience packed into those years. As he packed the last parachute, one of the younger soldiers, a cocky private named Davis, approached him. "You still working on those old parachutes, Grandpa?" Davis asked with a smirk, nudging his friend who stood beside him. The friend chuckled, but the old man didn't react. He simply continued his work. "You know," Davis continued, "with all this fancy new tech, I'm surprised you still know how to fold a chute the old way. We've got machines for that now." The veteran didn't even look up. He just kept his hands moving, folding the fabric with a quiet precision that made Davis pause for a moment. But that moment was fleeting, and soon enough, Davis was back to his teasing. "What's your story, old man? How'd you end up here?" "Just a washed-up vet packing parachutes for the newbies." Still, no response came from the veteran. His eyes stayed focused on the task at hand. The younger soldier huffed in frustration. "Don't tell me you were actually one of those Navy SEALs. Those guys were real warriors." He snickered, but the veteran didn't flinch. He simply finished his work and stood up, rolling the last parachute into a neat bundle. It wasn't until Davis noticed something on the veteran's neck that things took a turn. As the old man straightened up, his collar shifted slightly, revealing a small tattoo on the side of his neck. A tattoo that immediately caught Davis's attention. The symbol was faded, but unmistakable. It was the emblem of the Navy SEALs, a mark of one of the most elite units in the world. Davis's smirk faded as he stared at the tattoo, his mind racing. He'd seen that symbol before, but never on someone who looked so ordinary. His eyes widened as the realization hit him. The old man wasn't just some washed-up vet. This was a Navy SEAL, a true legend, one who had been through more than Davis could ever imagine. The young soldier's heart raced as he looked back at the veteran, who had already turned away, unbothered by the sudden shift in the atmosphere. But it wasn't just the tattoo that had changed everything. It was the weight of it, the silent power that now radiated from the old man. Davis felt a lump form in his throat as he realized he had underestimated him completely. The air in the room grew tense as the young soldier, Davis, stood frozen, staring at the faded tattoo on the old veteran's neck. The SEAL emblem, though worn with age, was unmistakable. It wasn't just any symbol. It represented one of the most elite units in the United States military. The symbol that only those who had earned it through immense sacrifice and bravery could proudly wear. Davis swallowed hard, a wave of realization washing over him. He had just mocked a living legend. The veteran, still unaware of the shift in Davis's demeanor, calmly began gathering the parachutes, his hands moving with practiced precision. But in that moment, everything had changed. The old man wasn't just packing parachutes. He was a man with a history that Davis had unknowingly disrespected. Davis's thoughts raced, but the old man's silence was deafening. How could he have been so blind? The thought of the many stories he had heard of Navy SEALs and their unmatched skills, their courage in the face of the worst circumstances, now felt like a distant memory. Davis had been so consumed with his own arrogance that he had completely missed the truth standing right in front of him. The veteran's calmness only made the weight of his mistake hit harder. He didn't say a word, but his presence spoke volumes. The young soldier felt the need to apologize, but the words wouldn't come. The veteran finished packing the last parachute and stood up, his movements slow but deliberate. He didn't look at Davis, but the young man felt the shift. The room was no longer just a place for mundane tasks. It had become a space where respect and history collided. "I'm sorry," Davis muttered, barely above a whisper. The words felt weak, hollow even, as if they couldn't possibly undo the disrespect he had shown. The veteran didn't acknowledge him, didn't look back. He simply turned and began walking toward the exit, his every step exuding quiet confidence. Davis, still standing by the parachutes, stared at the door the old man had walked through. His mind raced, but it wasn't just about the tattoo. It was the realization that he had just come face to face with someone who had been through things he couldn't even imagine. He had been so quick to judge, so quick to assume. But now he understood. The veteran wasn't just a man packing parachutes. He was a hero, a part of a brotherhood that few could even comprehend. The door swung open, and the sound of boots echoing down the hall reached Davis's ears. But as the sound faded, a new thought emerged. Davis had a lot to learn. He had been too quick to dismiss the older generation, too quick to judge someone based on their appearance or age. But the veteran had shown him something more valuable than any lesson in training. He had shown him humility, and it was a lesson that Davis would never forget. As the minutes ticked by, Davis felt a deep sense of regret for his actions. He had always prided himself on being a soldier, on being tough, on being part of something greater. But now he saw that it wasn't just about being tough. It was about respect, about understanding the sacrifices made by those who came before him. He looked down at the parachutes, the very ones the old man had just finished packing. They were ready. They would do their job, just like the veteran had done his. The weight of that thought settled over Davis. The old man had packed those parachutes with care, with the same dedication he had put into every mission he had ever completed. It was more than just a job for him. It was a way of life. And Davis realized he had a long way to go before he could ever truly understand what that meant. As the days passed, the atmosphere on the base shifted. Davis found himself unable to shake the image of the old man, the quiet veteran, who had casually dismissed his teasing and walked away with the same calm dignity that now weighed on Davis's conscience. The silence of that moment, when he had looked at the veteran's tattoo, haunted him. He tried to continue with his duties, but the thought of the old man lingered in his mind. It was as if he had encountered something far greater than he had ever imagined. The young soldiers around him still teased each other, cracking jokes and boasting about their latest training exercises, but Davis couldn't join in. He had been changed. His arrogance had been shattered, and he knew he had to make it right. A few days later, Davis found himself walking through the base again. The usual hustle and bustle filled the air, but today, something felt different. As he passed the parachute packing area, he spotted the old veteran again. He was working quietly, as always, packing a new set of parachutes. Davis hesitated for a moment, watching him. He had never really taken the time to understand what the veteran had gone through, what he had lived through. The old man's steady hands moved with the same precision as they always did, folding and checking each parachute with care. There was no rush, no arrogance in his movements, just a quiet professionalism. Davis took a deep breath and walked over to him. "Hey," he said, his voice quieter than he had intended. The veteran glanced up, his eyes steady and calm, but there was something in them that Davis couldn't quite place. Maybe it was the wisdom or the weight of years spent in service. "I owe you an apology," Davis continued, his words feeling strange in his mouth. "I was rude the other day. I was disrespectful, and I shouldn't have been." The veteran didn't respond immediately. Instead, he simply nodded and returned to his work, not in a dismissive way, but in a way that made Davis feel as though the apology had been received. It wasn't about the words. It was about the actions. "You're not just an old man packing parachutes," Davis said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "You're a hero, and I was a fool to think otherwise." The veteran continued working, folding the parachute as if the words didn't matter. But to Davis, they meant everything. In that moment, he understood. The old man's silence wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sign of strength, of a life lived with purpose and humility. He had seen things that Davis couldn't even begin to imagine. He had earned the right to be silent, to stand apart from the noise of the younger generation. The young soldier stood there for a few more moments, watching the veteran work. He didn't feel the need to say anything else. The apology had been made, and in the veteran's silence, there was more respect than any words could ever convey. Davis left the packing area with a new sense of understanding. The old man's presence, his quiet strength, had taught him more than any training session or battle could. As he walked away, Davis couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. He had learned a lesson that day, one that would stay with him for the rest of his life. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was part of something greater, something that required humility, respect, and the understanding that true strength wasn't always loud or visible. Sometimes, it was quiet and unspoken, like the veteran who had earned his place in history without ever asking for recognition. Days passed, and Davis's newfound respect for the old veteran only grew. He couldn't stop thinking about the quiet strength the man exuded, a strength that had nothing to do with bravado or pride, but everything to do with humility and honor. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how little he truly understood what it meant to be part of something greater than oneself. But this realization wasn't enough to erase the tension still hanging in the air. There was one thing left. The old man's past, his legacy, and what he had done for this country. Davis needed to know. It was a Friday afternoon when Davis finally made up his mind. The veteran had been packing parachutes as usual, but today, something felt different. The usual chatter on base was quieter, more subdued. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, like something was about to happen. As Davis walked towards the packing area, he saw the veteran at work once again, silently moving with an efficiency that seemed almost supernatural. He stood at a distance for a while, unsure of how to approach him. He had already apologized, but that didn't feel like enough. He needed to know the man's story, the story of a veteran who had earned the right to silence. As he hesitated, a figure walked up beside him. It was Sergeant Major Hayes, the commanding officer who had once taken notice of Davis's lack of respect towards the veteran. Hayes didn't say a word at first, just stood there, watching the old man work. "You want to know about him, don't you?" Sergeant Major Hayes finally asked, his voice low and calm. Davis, surprised by the question, simply nodded. "Everyone does," Hayes continued. "But not everyone gets the chance to understand. Some stories are meant to stay buried. But you seem different." Davis shifted uncomfortably. "I don't understand," he muttered. "He's just packing parachutes. Why is it such a big deal?" Hayes gave him a sideways glance. "That's where you're wrong, son. What he's doing isn't just packing parachutes. It's about the respect he's earned. The work he does is a testament to his entire career. He doesn't need to boast about it. He doesn't need anyone to recognize him. But if you want to know what kind of man he really is, I'll tell you this. You're standing in front of one of the most decorated veterans this country has ever known." Davis's heart skipped a beat. He had never really thought of it that way. The veteran had always been quiet, humble, and elusive. But now, with Hayes's words hanging in the air, Davis realized there was so much more to the man. "Then met the eye. What did he do?" Davis asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sergeant Major Hayes took a long breath. "The old man you see packing parachutes? He was a Navy SEAL, one of the best. He served in Vietnam, in the most dangerous operations you could imagine. You think he's just packing parachutes? No. He's remembering the lives he saved, the missions he completed, the brothers he lost. That tattoo you saw on his neck? It's a reminder of all of it. The sacrifices, the victories, the pain." Davis stood frozen, his mind struggling to process the words. The man he had mocked, the man who had seemed like nothing more than a quiet, older worker, was one of the most decorated heroes in military history. He was part of the team that took down some of the most dangerous enemies this country has ever faced, Hayes continued. And even though he's no longer in active service, the respect he commands is unmatched. Not because of the medals, but because of the life he's lived. Davis felt a wave of guilt and admiration wash over him. He had judged the old man, thinking he was just another retiree doing a simple job. But now, he realized how wrong he had been. The veteran had earned the right to live in peace, without the need for recognition or fame. Why didn't he ever tell anyone? Davis asked, genuinely curious. Hayes smiled softly. Because he doesn't need to. That's the kind of man he is. He doesn't seek praise, and he doesn't want to be seen as a hero. He's already given enough. And if he doesn't want to talk about it, that's his choice. But you. Hayes turned to face him, his expression serious now. You'll learn something from him. You'll learn that true strength isn't about what you've done. It's about who you are when no one is watching. Davis nodded slowly, a lump forming in his throat. He had never felt so humbled. As Hayes walked away, Davis turned back to look at the veteran. The old man was still packing parachutes, working with the same quiet intensity. But now, Davis saw him for who he truly was. A hero. A man who had sacrificed everything and asked for nothing in return. A man who had earned the right to be silent. The next few days passed quietly, but Davis couldn't shake the lessons he had learned from the old veteran. His mind often drifted back to the quiet strength the man embodied. Every day, Davis found himself looking at the veteran with a newfound sense of respect. It wasn't just about the veteran's past or his heroic deeds. It was about the way he lived, the way he carried himself, and how he never sought anything for himself. The more Davis thought about it, the more he realized how much he had taken for granted. But life on base continued, and there was always work to be done. One afternoon, Davis was stationed at a new task, loading up supplies for an upcoming exercise. The hustle of the military base surrounded him, the sound of footsteps echoing through the hallways, the constant hum of machinery in the background. But as he passed by the parachute packing area, he couldn't help but glance over. To his surprise, the old man was not there. Davis's first instinct was to brush it off. After all, the veteran had been there every day without fail. But something didn't feel right. He walked over to the small break room nearby and asked one of the other soldiers, "Has anyone seen the old man today?" The soldier looked up, puzzled. "You mean the parachute packer? Haven't seen him around since this morning. Maybe he's on break." But Davis could tell something was off. It wasn't like the old man to take a break at this time. Something told him it wasn't just a simple rest. After a moment of hesitation, Davis walked over to the main office, where Sergeant Major Hayes was speaking with a few other officers. "Sir," Davis called out, his voice firm but filled with concern. "Is everything okay with the veteran? I haven't seen him around today." Hayes turned to face him, his face unreadable for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, his eyes flickering with a hint of something unspoken. "He's gone," Hayes said softly. "The veteran has been called back for a special mission. It's classified. He doesn't talk about it much, but he still gets called in when needed." Davis felt a lump form in his throat. He had spent so much time admiring the old man, thinking of him as someone who had earned his place in peace, only to realize that the veteran's job was never truly done. He had been a hero before, and he was still a hero. "When will he be back?" Davis asked, his voice shaking with uncertainty. Hayes looked at him, his expression softening. "That's something only he knows, son. He doesn't do it for the recognition. He never did. You see, the man you've been looking up to, he's always been more than just a quiet old man packing parachutes. He's a part of a much bigger picture. But we don't get to know when he'll return. He comes and goes as the mission calls him." The weight of Hayes's words settled on Davis like a heavy blanket. He thought back to the way the veteran had moved through the base, so quietly and unobtrusively, always with purpose. He had never sought attention or accolades, but in the silence of his work, he had been a symbol of something far greater than anyone on base realized. A few days later, the base received word that a mission had been completed successfully. It wasn't long before the veteran returned, as quietly as he had left. He appeared at the parachute packing area, as if nothing had changed, as if he had never been gone. He greeted Davis with a simple nod, but said nothing. Davis, however, knew that the man was more than what he appeared. The quiet veteran was a living testament to something powerful. He wasn't just packing parachutes. He was living out a legacy, one that went far beyond his military service. Davis's respect for him had grown even deeper, and he knew that he would never look at the veteran or anyone like him the same way again. As he watched the old man pack the parachutes with the same steady hands, Davis realized that the true measure of strength wasn't in how loudly someone proclaimed their accomplishments, but in how quietly they carried their burden. The veteran had given everything without asking for anything in return, and that, Davis knew, was the kind of heroism that would never be forgotten. The days after the veteran's return were quieter than usual. The base had gone through its regular routine, but something was different. Davis couldn't quite place it, but he felt as though he had learned something essential about respect, duty, and heroism, something that wouldn't easily leave his mind. It had. Been a few days since the veteran had returned from his secret mission, and while his presence on the base remained unassuming, the aura of respect he carried with him was unmistakable. It was around midday when Davis was called into Sergeant Major Hayes's office. As he walked through the door, Hayes was sitting behind his desk, looking over a few reports. He didn't look up immediately, but when Davis stepped inside, Hayes gave a slight nod. "Davis, good. I need to speak with you about something important." Davis stood at attention, the weight of the words hanging in the air. He had no idea what this was about, but from the way Hayes had spoken, it didn't feel like a routine meeting. "Sit down, son," Hayes said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "You've been around the veteran long enough now to see what kind of man he really is." Davis sat down, feeling a slight unease. "Yes, sir," he replied. "He's not like anyone else I've ever met. I don't think I truly understood what he was until recently. It's like he's been through so much, but he doesn't wear it on his sleeve. He's quiet, but there's so much strength there." Hayes looked at him intently, his expression serious. "You're right. That man, he's been through more than you could ever imagine. But there's something else you need to understand." Davis leaned in, his curiosity piqued. "What's that, sir?" "The veteran's time on this base is coming to an end," Hayes said quietly. "The missions he's been called back for, they're not just routine. He's been asked to help on one final operation. It's something big, something that requires every ounce of experience he has." Davis felt a lump form in his throat. The thought of the veteran leaving the base, of him being called away for one last mission, was difficult to process. "Will he be back, sir?" Davis asked, his voice tight. Hayes sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I don't know, son. It's classified. The kind of work he's been involved in, it's not something we can just talk about openly. But I can tell you this. The veteran has earned the right to fade into the background if he wants to. He's done his part, more than most could ever dream of." Davis nodded slowly, trying to absorb the weight of Hayes's words. "I know you've seen a glimpse of the man's history, but there's so much more to him than just the tattoos, the stories, and the silence. The way he carries himself, the way he serves, it's all a reflection of the values he holds dear." Davis's mind began to race. He couldn't imagine what kind of mission the veteran would be called to now. The idea of him leaving, without a word, was hard to swallow. But Davis also knew that if anyone deserved to walk away quietly, it was the veteran. "What do I need to do, sir?" Davis asked, determined to do his part. Hayes leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Respect him, Davis. That's the most important thing. You've learned something valuable from him, whether you realize it or not. Now it's time to pass that on. We're all part of a larger mission. Just because the veteran is leaving doesn't mean his legacy won't continue." Davis took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Hayes's words settle in. "Yes, sir. I understand." Over the next few days, Davis kept a low profile, keeping to his duties while reflecting on everything he had learned. The veteran's departure loomed, and Davis could feel it in the air. The veteran never spoke of his next mission. He didn't need to. It wasn't his style to boast or seek recognition. But as Davis saw him working in silence, folding parachutes with the same care he had always shown, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of admiration. The veteran had done more than just serve his country. He had become a symbol of humility, strength, and quiet heroism. And as the days passed, Davis knew that this final chapter in the veteran's story wasn't something that needed to be celebrated with fanfare or ceremony. It was something to be respected in silence. On the day of the veteran's departure, Davis found himself standing in the same parachute packing area where they had crossed paths so many times. The veteran was there, packing one last set of parachutes, his hands steady and precise. Davis stepped forward, his heart pounding. "Good luck," Davis said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. The veteran looked up, and for the first time, he smiled. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was enough. "Thank you," the veteran replied softly, his voice rough with age. "An experience." Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the distance. Davis stood there for a moment, watching him go. The silence hung heavy in the air, but this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with respect, with understanding, and with the knowledge that some heroes didn't need applause. Some heroes just needed to fade away, knowing that their legacy would never be forgotten. Weeks passed after the veteran's departure, and the base began to feel emptier. The routine that once seemed so full of life and energy had suddenly lost its rhythm, and Davis could feel the absence more sharply with each passing day. The old veteran's silent departure had left a void that no amount of training or mission briefings could fill. It wasn't just the quietude of his presence that was gone, it was the sense of wisdom, of knowing that there had been a man among them who had seen more than most could ever imagine and asked for nothing in return. The base had returned to its usual pace, with drills and exercises keeping everyone busy, but Davis couldn't help but notice the change in himself. He was different now, in a way that was hard to describe. He had always thought of himself as someone who understood what it meant to be part of something bigger, to serve in the military and follow orders. But after the veteran's silent example, he had come to realize that there was a deeper layer to service. It wasn't about the accolades, the medals, or the recognition. It was about something more profound: honor, humility, and sacrifice. One afternoon, Davis was walking down the main corridor when he was called into Sergeant Major Hayes's office again. He stepped in, and Hayes motioned for him to take a seat. "You've been quiet lately, Davis," Hayes remarked, his tone calm. "I noticed it a few days ago. You've been thinking a lot about the old man, haven't you?" Davis hesitated but then nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. I can't stop thinking about what he taught me. I didn't realize it at first, but now it's all I can think about." Hayes studied him for a moment, his eyes thoughtful. "It's a good thing, Davis. What you're feeling isn't weakness. It's growth. You've learned something that most soldiers never do. Not from a book, not from any drill. You've learned the real meaning of service." Davis sat back, taking in the words. "I thought I understood what it meant to serve, but I didn't know the half of it. The way he carried himself, so quietly, and without needing anyone to notice. It's made me question everything I've ever known about duty." Hayes gave a slight smile. "You've seen it now. Service isn't just about wearing the uniform, following orders, or even being the loudest in the room. It's about doing your job with integrity, with respect for others, and without the need for validation." The old man was a perfect example of that. Davis nodded, feeling a surge of pride and respect for the veteran that seemed to grow each time he thought about him. "What happened to him?" he asked. "Where did he go?" Hayes's expression darkened slightly, but there was no sadness in his voice when he spoke. "He's gone, son. Like I told you before, he's always been a part of something bigger. He's out there doing what he was trained to do. He might never come back, and that's something we have to accept. But don't forget, he didn't do it for the praise or the recognition. He did it because that's who he is. He's a soldier. He always has been." A sense of finality filled the room, but Davis didn't feel sad. There was a sense of peace in knowing that the veteran had chosen this life, and that he had walked away when he was ready, without needing anything more. "I get it now, sir," Davis said quietly. "I won't forget what he taught me. I'll carry it with me, always." Hayes nodded. "Good. Because there are others like him, and there will be more who come after. The legacy of what he's done will continue, even if we don't see it. But now it's your turn. You've been given a gift. It's up to you what you do with it." The weight of those words settled on Davis's shoulders like a mantle he had never expected. He had been given the opportunity to serve, to learn, and to grow, but now it was time to put everything into action. As he left Hayes's office, Davis walked down the hall with a new sense of purpose. He had always thought of the military as a place where men and women were trained to follow orders, to be part of a team, and to perform their duties. But now he saw that it was about something deeper. It was about becoming something greater than oneself, even when no one was watching. That was the true test of honor. And as he walked back to his duties, he knew that the lessons the old veteran had imparted would stay with him forever. They weren't lessons that could be written in a manual or taught in a classroom. They were lessons of character, humility, and service, lessons that couldn't be forgotten. He was ready to honor the legacy of the veteran, to live up to the example he had set, and to serve with the same quiet strength that had inspired him all along. Weeks passed, and Davis continued to think about the veteran. The base had become a little quieter, and Davis felt that quietness settle in his bones, something that seemed to be a reflection of the old man's presence even after he had left. It was strange. For the first time, Davis realized that everything the veteran had done had been out of sheer duty, not for recognition or praise. It wasn't until after the veteran's departure that Davis fully grasped the weight of his actions. His own perspective had shifted, and he started to view every task, no matter how small, with a new sense of purpose. It was early in the morning when Davis received an unexpected call from Sergeant Major Hayes. "Davis, get to the training field now," Hayes said, his voice tight with urgency. Davis's heart began to race. He had never heard Hayes sound so serious. "What's going on, sir?" he asked, his voice betraying his unease. "Just get there. No questions," Hayes snapped. Davis hung up, the phone's click echoing in his ears as he quickly grabbed his gear and ran toward the training field. As he approached, he saw several other soldiers gathered, all standing at attention. A few were whispering to each other, exchanging nervous glances. Davis didn't know what was going on, but he could tell something was happening. Then, he saw Hayes, his face grim as he stood next to a group of higher-ranking officers. "What's this about, sir?" Davis asked, his voice low. Hayes didn't respond immediately. Instead, he motioned for Davis to follow him. As they walked away from the group, Hayes finally spoke. "You remember the veteran," he said quietly. "The old man who packed parachutes. Well, we've received word that one of the missions he was involved in is coming to a close." Davis's heart skipped a beat. The veteran had been on a special mission, and now, it seemed like he was about to return. Hayes continued, "This mission is classified, Davis. But the reason I called you here is because we've just received a report. The veteran, he's been taken. Captured, in fact." Davis froze. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. The veteran, the man who had silently walked away from his service, had been captured? It didn't seem real. "We don't know the details," Hayes added. "But we're preparing to move out. You're going to be part of the team that goes to retrieve him. You've learned a lot from him. It's time for you to do what you've been trained to do." Davis nodded, his mind racing. He couldn't believe it. The man who had been the epitome of strength, of quiet heroism, was now the one in need of saving. It didn't make sense. But Davis knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let him down. As the team prepared to move out, Davis's thoughts kept drifting back to the veteran's calm demeanor, to the way he had carried himself without ever seeking praise. The man had given so much, and now he needed them. Davis pushed the doubt aside and focused on the mission. As they boarded the transport vehicles and made their way to the extraction point, the weight of the situation settled in. Davis knew that this mission wasn't just about rescuing a veteran. It was about honoring the legacy of a man who had served with dignity, without ever asking for recognition. The ride felt like it lasted hours, even though it was only a few minutes. When the team arrived at the site, they quickly moved into position, with Davis leading the charge. He had never been part of a mission like this before. It wasn't just about following orders anymore. It was about protecting someone who had taught him what true strength was. The veteran had sacrificed so much for the country, and now it was time for them to return the favor. They moved cautiously through the dark. The sounds of their boots muffled against the ground. Every step was measured, every movement calculated. Davis's heart raced, but his training kicked in. He couldn't let fear or hesitation cloud his judgment. They reached the building where the veteran was being held. Davis's pulse quickened. This was it. The mission had brought him full circle, from the quiet, humble man who had taught him respect, to the soldier who now had to return the favor. As the team breached the building, Davis's mind was sharp, his focus unwavering. Every soldier moved in unison, checking corners, scanning for threats. They reached the room where the veteran was being held, and there, in the dim light, they saw him. He was sitting against the wall, his hands bound, but his eyes were calm, even in the face of danger. The veteran hadn't changed. He was still the same man who had walked away without a word. Davis rushed to him, cutting the ropes binding his hands. The veteran looked up at him, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I knew you'd come," he said softly. Davis felt a lump form in his throat. The veteran didn't need to say anything else. It was enough. He had never truly been alone. As the team secured the veteran and moved out, Davis stayed close to him, watching over him like the man had once watched over everyone else. They were now the ones who owed him. They had learned from him, and now they would protect him. The mission was complete, but Davis knew that the veteran's lessons would stay with him for the rest of his life. The mission had been a success, but it was not without its scars. The veteran, despite his calm exterior, had been through a hell of his own. As Davis and the team made their way back to the base, the weight of the mission hung heavily on their shoulders. They had saved a man who had once saved countless others, but there was no celebration, no fanfare. The quiet humility of the veteran had rubbed off on them all, and as the helicopter touched down, there was a profound silence among the team. Davis glanced at the veteran, who sat quietly in his seat, his eyes steady as ever. No one had heard a word from him during the entire flight. He hadn't complained, hadn't asked for anything. Just like before, he was a man of few words, but his presence spoke volumes. As they disembarked and made their way toward the briefing room, Davis couldn't help but feel a deep sense of admiration. He had seen the veteran in action, had witnessed the quiet strength and humility that defined him. But seeing him now, walking alongside the team as if he were just another soldier, made Davis realize something deeper. The veteran wasn't just a hero because of what he had done. He was a hero because of how he had lived, quietly, humbly, and without any need for validation. Inside the briefing room, they were met with Colonel Hayes, who had been briefed on the mission's success. "Well done, everyone," Hayes said, his voice firm but filled with pride. "You did good work today. But remember, this mission wasn't just about the veteran. It was about honoring everything he's done for this country. He's been through more than any of you can imagine. And now he's back where he belongs." Davis stood quietly, his gaze fixed on the veteran, who stood off to the side, as still and composed as ever. Hayes continued, "You've all learned something valuable today. You've learned what true service looks like. And it's not about the medals, the praise, or the recognition. It's about doing what's right, even when no one is looking. It's about loyalty, sacrifice, and humility." The words resonated deeply with Davis. He realized that this was the true lesson he had learned. It wasn't the physical training, the drills, or the exercises. It was the intangible qualities that made a soldier truly great. And the veteran had embodied all of those qualities in ways that were impossible to describe. As the meeting concluded and the team began to file out of the room, Davis lingered behind. He watched as the veteran slowly made his way toward the exit, moving with the same quiet grace that had defined him throughout the entire mission. For a moment, Davis hesitated, then walked over to him. "Thank you," Davis said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. The veteran didn't look at him, but he nodded once, as if acknowledging the unspoken understanding between them. "You taught me something I'll never forget," Davis added. The veteran's lips twitched slightly, almost as if he were about to say something, but he said nothing. He simply placed a hand on Davis's shoulder, a silent gesture of camaraderie and respect. Davis felt the weight of the moment sink in. This man, who had been through so much, who had seen so many battles and lost so many friends, was still standing. And he wasn't standing for recognition, or praise, or for anything other than the quiet, unyielding sense of duty that defined him. As Davis watched him leave, he couldn't help but feel a sense of deep respect. The veteran wasn't just a man. He was a living testament to everything that made a soldier truly great. And as Davis stood there, reflecting on all he had learned, he knew that he would carry the lessons of the veteran with him for the rest of his life. He would live his service with the same quiet strength, humility, and honor that the veteran had shown him. And, in doing so, he would honor the legacy of the man who had taught him the true meaning of duty. The days after the mission were filled with a new kind of quiet. Davis moved through the base with purpose, but the weight of what he had experienced seemed to linger. He had learned more than he could have ever expected. The veteran's lessons were now embedded in every action, every decision he made. But there was still something that haunted him, a question that had remained unanswered since the veteran's departure. What happened to him after the mission? What did he do once the job was done? Davis had spoken to Sergeant Major Hayes after the mission, but Hayes had been tight-lipped about the details. The only thing he had said was that the veteran had gone back into the shadows, where he was needed, and that there were things Davis didn't need to know. But Davis wasn't sure he could leave it there. The respect he had for the veteran had only grown, and he felt an obligation to understand more, to learn more. One evening, as he was walking through the barracks, he overheard some whispers among the other soldiers. They were talking about a ceremony, something that was happening later that week. It was a high-level event, and Davis caught snippets of conversations about the veteran's service being recognized in a more formal way. Curiosity piqued, Davis made his way to the briefing room to get more information. The room was filled with senior officers, and Sergeant Major Hayes was standing at the front, briefing the group about the upcoming event. "We're going to be honoring someone who has given so much to this country," Hayes said, his voice steady but filled with pride. Someone who doesn't seek recognition but has earned it more than anyone else here. Davis's heart skipped a beat. He knew exactly who Hayes was talking about. The veteran. This is about more than just one person, Hayes continued. It's about the values he represents, the values that we all strive to embody. Loyalty, duty, respect, and sacrifice. We will be recognizing not only his service but the example he set for all of us. His humility, his integrity, his dedication to the mission. Davis stood in the back of the room, listening intently, but the more he heard, the more confused he became. He had never seen the veteran accept any form of praise or recognition, and yet here they were, about to honor him in a way that felt almost out of character. He's not someone who needs to be in the spotlight, Hayes said, as if reading Davis's mind. But sometimes, it's important to shine that light, to remind ourselves of the sacrifices that people like him have made. We don't just honor the uniform. We honor the man who wears it. Davis's thoughts swirled. The veteran had always avoided the spotlight, had always stayed in the background, working quietly and diligently. Now, they were about to shine that light on him, and Davis wasn't sure what the veteran would think. But as the ceremony drew closer, something shifted in Davis. He realized that it wasn't about the veteran's preference for quietude. It was about honoring the man who had set the example, who had lived a life that others could only aspire to. This ceremony wasn't about making the veteran uncomfortable. It was about showing the world and the next generation of soldiers what true heroism looked like. The day of the ceremony arrived, and the base was buzzing with activity. The officers were all in their best uniforms, and the soldiers lined up in formation, awaiting the arrival of the guest of honor. Davis stood among them, feeling a mix of pride and unease. The veteran was about to be honored in front of everyone, something he had never wanted, but something that was well-deserved. As the ceremony began, the mood was somber yet respectful. Hayes stepped forward, addressing the gathered soldiers and officers. Today, we honor a man who has served this country with unmatched courage and dedication. A man who has been through things we can't even imagine. A man who has sacrificed everything for the greater good. We are here to celebrate his service, his sacrifice, and the lessons he has taught us all. The crowd stood in silence, and for a moment, Davis thought he saw the veteran standing at the back of the room. But when he looked again, the veteran was nowhere to be seen. As the ceremony continued, Hayes spoke of the veteran's extraordinary career, his numerous accomplishments, and the countless lives he had saved. But there was no mention of the veteran's departure from the public eye. No mention of the quiet life he led now. It was clear that the veteran's story would never be fully told. And perhaps that was the point. As the ceremony concluded, the soldiers filed out, and Davis was left standing in the hallway, his thoughts racing. He had learned so much from the veteran, but there was still one question that lingered. What was next for him? The man who had given everything and expected nothing. Would he continue to live in the shadows? Or had this ceremony marked the beginning of something new for him? As Davis stood there, lost in thought, he felt a quiet sense of peace settle over him. The veteran's lessons would continue to guide him, and no matter what happened next, he would carry those lessons with him every day. The veteran's legacy was far more than the stories told in ceremonies. It was in the way Davis carried himself, in the way he approached his duties, and in the quiet, unwavering sense of duty that had been instilled in him. The veteran had given Davis more than just knowledge. He had given him the courage to be quiet, to lead with humility, and to serve with honor. And that, Davis realized, was the greatest gift of all. The days following the ceremony passed with a quiet intensity. Davis felt the weight of everything he had learned from the veteran, but also the burden of carrying on that legacy. The veteran had taught him so much, and now it was time for him to apply those lessons in his own life. As the base returned to its usual routine, Davis couldn't help but notice how the veteran's influence had spread throughout the soldiers. There was a new sense of respect, of quiet determination, that had settled in. It wasn't something anyone spoke about, but it was evident in the way the soldiers moved, worked, and interacted with one another. No one had to say anything. They all knew. It was as if the veteran's spirit had become embedded in the very fabric of the base. One afternoon, while Davis was training with a few other soldiers, he caught a glimpse of something in the distance. It was the veteran, standing by the edge of the training field, watching them quietly. Davis's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't seen the veteran around much since the ceremony, and now, there he was, observing from a distance. For a moment, Davis froze, unsure of what to do. But then he remembered what he had learned. The veteran wasn't there for the praise, the accolades, or the attention. He was there because that was who he was, a silent presence, always watching, always leading by example. Without thinking, Davis walked over to him. "Sir," he said, his voice steady but filled with respect. "What are you doing here?" The veteran turned to him, and for a moment, their eyes locked. There was no need for words. The veteran simply nodded, a quiet acknowledgement of Davis's presence. "Just watching," the veteran said softly. "Watching them become what they need to be." Davis nodded, understanding what the veteran meant. He wasn't there to instruct, to correct, or to lead with words. He was there because, like the rest of the soldiers on base, he had been part of something greater. And now, his purpose was to observe, to ensure that the lessons he had instilled in them would continue long after he had left. "I've learned a lot from you," Davis said quietly, his voice filled with sincerity. "From the way you carry yourself. From how you've taught us what it really means to serve." The veteran didn't respond immediately. He just looked at Davis for a long moment, his gaze steady and unwavering. Finally, he spoke. "You're the one who's learning, Davis," he said, his voice calm. "But it's not about me. It's about all of you. You've got the tools. You've got the strength. What you do with them, that's what matters. And you don't need me to tell you that." Davis felt a lump form in his throat. He had spent so much time trying to understand the veteran, trying to find a way to explain the quiet strength that had defined him. But now, in this moment, he realized that the veteran's lessons didn't need to be explained. They didn't need to be said out loud. They were already there, in everything the veteran had done. The veteran gave a slight nod, as if he could sense Davis's thoughts. "You'll be fine," he said quietly. "But remember this, true strength isn't in what you can do. It's in what you can endure. It's in what you can give, even when no one is looking." With those words, the veteran turned and walked away, disappearing into the distance once again. Davis stood there, watching him go. He had learned so much, not from anything the veteran had said, but from everything he had done. The quiet strength, the humility, the willingness to serve without asking for anything in return. It was all there, embedded in every action, in every glance. Davis felt a new sense of purpose wash over him. He understood now. It wasn't about becoming a hero. It was about embodying the values that made a hero. He didn't need to seek recognition. He didn't need to make a name for himself. He just needed to do his job, to serve with integrity, and to live with the same quiet strength the veteran had shown him. As Davis walked back to the training field, he knew that the lessons he had learned from the veteran would stay with him for the rest of his life. And he knew that, in some small way, he would continue the legacy of that quiet hero, carrying the lessons forward, never needing to speak them aloud, but always living them through his actions. The days that followed the veteran's departure were a mix of reflection and quiet growth for Davis. He had absorbed the lessons, the quiet strength that had been instilled in him, but now it was his time to carry those lessons forward. As the weeks turned into months, Davis found himself embracing a new purpose. He no longer sought validation in the same way he once did. There were no more questions about what it meant to serve. It had become clear. Serving wasn't about seeking recognition or accolades. It was about doing what was right, even when no one was watching. Davis found himself working with new recruits, leading them through drills, tasks, and exercises. At first, he had been uncertain, unsure of how to take on the role of a leader. But the lessons the veteran had taught him were guiding him every step of the way. He didn't need to be loud, didn't need to show off or prove himself. His actions spoke for him. Over time, the recruits began to take notice of him. They saw the way he moved with purpose, the way he led by example, and the respect he had for his fellow soldiers. They may not have known the full story, but they could see that Davis was different. And that was enough. One day, after a particularly grueling exercise, Davis was walking back to his quarters when he noticed a familiar figure standing near the training field. It was the veteran. For a moment, Davis hesitated, unsure if he was seeing things. But as he walked closer, the veteran turned to face him. There was no fanfare, no grand gesture. The veteran simply stood there, watching Davis approach. "Sir," Davis said quietly, his voice filled with a mix of respect and surprise. The veteran nodded but didn't say anything. It was clear that he had been watching, just as he had watched all those months ago. I've learned a lot since you left, Davis continued, the words flowing more easily now. About service, about leadership, about what it means to be part of something bigger. The veteran gave a small nod, acknowledging Davis's words, but again, he said nothing. There was no need for words. The silence between them was comfortable now, filled with understanding. I've been doing my best to pass on what I've learned to the others, Davis added. To lead by example, like you did. The veteran's eyes softened. Still, he said nothing, but Davis could feel the weight of his approval in the air. It wasn't about grand speeches or public acknowledgement. It was about the quiet bond they shared, the shared understanding that their duty was to serve, not for praise, but for something greater. After a long pause, the veteran finally spoke. You're doing good work, Davis, he said quietly. Keep it up. The words were simple, but they meant everything to Davis. The veteran's approval, his silent recognition, was all that mattered. Without another word, the veteran turned and began to walk away, disappearing into the distance once more. Davis watched him go, a sense of peace settling over him. He had learned everything he needed to know from the veteran. It wasn't in the grand gestures or the speeches. It was in the quiet moments, in the small acts of service, in the way one soldier treated another. That was the true measure of strength. And as Davis stood there, watching the veteran disappear into the distance, he realized that the lessons he had learned would stay with him forever. He didn't need to see the veteran again to know that he had made a difference. The impact he had left was in Davis, in every action, in every decision. He was living the legacy of the quiet hero who had taught him everything without saying a word. This emotional story follows the journey of a young soldier who learns valuable lessons about service, respect, and true heroism from an older, silent veteran. As the soldier grows under the guidance of the veteran, he learns that strength comes not from recognition, but from quiet dedication and sacrifice. Throughout the emotional story, we see the soldier evolve from someone seeking validation to someone who understands the deeper meaning of service. The story highlights how the veteran, through his actions and humility, teaches the young soldier to lead by example and serve with honor. The emotional story explores the bond between the two, with the veteran's silent wisdom impacting the soldier's life in ways words never could. As the soldier continues to carry out his duties, he applies the lessons learned, passing them on to others. This emotional story is not just about a hero's past, but about the legacy of quiet strength and unwavering duty that lasts for generations. The emotional story concludes with the soldier, now a leader, living out the values instilled in him, honoring the veteran's memory in his own actions. Each part of this emotional story speaks to the power of humility, respect, and the true essence of service.